So this is Tsarist Russia, bullet point 1, 1881 to 1905. The first thing you need to know for the exam is what is the nature of autocracy. So really we're talking of a system of government where supreme power is in the hands of one person. Their decisions are not subject to external legal restraints, nor regularised mechanisms of popular control. All power and wealth is controlled and distributed by the Tsar. The Tsar is sovereign with absolute authority. He does have ministers, but they are advisory only. The next thing you need to be able to do is to list the repressive ways Alexander III used during his reign. Firstly, we have censorship. Control of all the press, books, leaflets, both inside and outside Russia. Printing presses were also closed down. Secondly, there was church control. The power of the church is extended via Pobedonostsev and his unshakable autocracy. There's more church schools being built to re-educate the people. Next is the Statute of State Security in 1881. Fair trials were abolished, no concessions for political opponents, and no more than groups of 12 can meet. Russification is also a way of controlling the people. It was the forcing of Russian culture and language and customs on all in the Russian Empire, so the minorities lose out with this. Also the hunting down of opposition. There's executions of revolutionary groups, like the People's Will, and they were prevented from meeting. And finally, the undoing of Alexander II's reforms. Alexander II made reforms to modernise Russia, and Alexander III stopped this. For example, with the changes to the Zemstva, the creation of censorship, and the Statute of State Security. These all gave Alexander III much more control over his people. The next thing you need to know for the exam is what is Wittey's role in transforming Russia. We're talking here about urbanisation and industrialisation. Firstly, Wittey was Minister of Transport, and then he was later Minister of Finance. So all of his policies are working on this basis. So firstly, this is a list of what Wittey did. Construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway, taxes, tariffs, foreign loans. He puts the ruble on the gold standard, which in turn sort of increases the investments and the flow of foreign capital. But this directly makes it exchangeable for gold. This means that it has a higher value. He really focuses on industry to modernise Russia. He also negotiates the Treaty of Portsmouth after the Russo-Japanese War. And he also advocates an elected parliament via the October Manifesto. What you'll also need to know about Wittey is his successes and failures in trying to achieve this. What is his role in transforming Russia, and is he any good at it? So firstly, in terms of the successes, we have the expansion of heavy industry. He also invites foreign experts to Russia to help modernise it, creates jobs for industry. All the cities start growing as all the peasants move to find work, try and find a better standard of living for themselves. He also explores natural resources in Russia, certain minerals and oil deposits, that sort of thing. The gold standard also brings investment and capital, like we've mentioned, and money is brought in for industry through the taxes and tariffs. The national income of the state rose by 30%, so he is doing good here. He is making money for Russia through these tariffs. The railway also means greater communication throughout Russia, easier collection of taxes, I suppose, in that sense, but also it enables him to pick out those natural resources as well. However, you also need to know what his failures were, or more accurately, his shortcomings. Firstly, the social and economic hardships that happened in the cities were just quite phenomenal. There was no job security, people could be hired on just a daily basis. There's long hours, there's low pay, there's no housing or sanitation. Sometimes you have, 16 people living in one house. There was sewage and human waste on the open streets. That caused a lot of diseases. And basically just generally poor living and working conditions. Sometimes even the people had to live in the factories where they worked because they had nowhere to live. So these social and economic hardships were massive. Also, parts of the railway were still incomplete up to about 1914 actually, so this takes a while to do. Russia could be argued to be too dependent on the foreign loans. Obviously, if you're getting money off someone, they'll want it back with interest. So that's not good for Russia. It only really helps investors and industrialists and the Tsar himself, I suppose. Not so much the common people. He doesn't really focus on agricultural issues. He doesn't help the peasants. He doesn't really help the workers so much. So there's a failure there. The putting the ruble on the gold standard is a brilliant idea, but it's already been proposed by other finance ministers before Witte, so it's not really his, his idea itself. Also, the taxes and tariffs, they're very harsh. They're causing the poor living and working conditions. And Russia is still behind other European nations and America in terms of their production. Population growth also means that production figures are less impressive, because if you've got more people doing that job, then of course your production will go up. You also need to know why are revolutionary groups growing up to 1905. And really, it's because of Witte's policies, as well as other things. For example, strong leadership is always needed to sort of pull off a repressive regime. And Nicholas isn't a strong leader. He's quite incompetent. Also, the great spurt that has happened is followed by a huge slump, leading to economic hardship, as well as, of course, what we were saying about Witte's policies. Social hardship amongst all classes, and Nicholas's refusal to make any changes. These are all reasons why revolutionary parties are growing at this time. So let's have a look at these different revolutionary parties. First you have the social revolutionaries, who are made out of the populist movement, led by Viktor Chernov, and the SRs believed that Russia's future lay with the peasantry and the workers. But there's factions that existed between them. So on the left hand, you've got a more terrorist wing, one that wants to use violence, the more dominant wing, and on the right, the more moderate. During the 1905 revolution, they supported the peasant uprisings, they create the All-Russian Union of Peasants, they call for peasant ownership of land without compensating the landowners. So really, they're growing in popularity due to Witte's policies, the social and economic situation of the time. You also need to know about the Social Democrats. Now, these are Marxists. They follow Karl Marx's theory on communism. And they're split into Mensheviks and Bolsheviks in 1903, and they believe that industrialization is essential for building a communist state. So, Lenin wanted dedicated revolutionaries to achieve the Marxist aim, and he writes this in What is to be Done in 1902. They don't really have much influence in 1905 because they're all in exile, but Lenin does write his letters from afar to direct the party. He also does come back in the revolution to do the Moscow uprising, which is an armed uprising put down by the police. So the Social Democrats are willing to use violence. The Liberals are more educated people. Western ideas are starting to seep through. They call for a greater influence in the Zemstva. In 1901, they create a newspaper called Liberation, and it called for constitutional monarchy. In 1904, they formed the Union of Liberation, and in 1905, they split into Octobrists and Cadets. You also need to know what are the causes of the 1905 revolution. So firstly, in the long-term causes, we have the social and economic situation. We're talking about the poverty, the population growth is making a strain on society, the size of land holdings falls because there's more people. We've got massive harvest failures, peasant violence and famine, slums in the cities, poor living and working conditions. Remember, the peasants have moved to the cities to find better job prospects, and then they're all hit by the slump, so life isn't good for them. Secondly, in long-term causes, we have the nature of the autocratic regime itself. So the Tsar is the only person to change anything, but is unwilling to listen to people. So demand for political reform at this time is growing. The short-term causes of the 1905 revolution, of course, the Russo-Japanese War, which has just started in 1904. The Russian defeats are seen as a national humiliation and help cause unrest against the government. It undermines support for the Tsar and helped prolong the revolution. It makes the Tsar look weak and encouraged revolutionaries. Another short-term cause of the 1905 revolution was Bloody Sunday. This was a disaster for the Tsar. It created widespread outrage from many sections of society. News spread quickly and sympathy strikes occurred. It destroyed the trust in the Tsar and again encouraged more strikes and protests. Another thing you'll need to be able to do is explain the nature, extent and significance of revolution. Revolutionary activity took many forms. Firstly, there were strikes, organised by discontented workers, not revolutionary groups. They set up Soviets, and the whole country is paralysed because the workers have control of all the railway stations and all the businesses, so they can bring the country to a standstill. There was peasant uprisings. These were attacks on landowners and caused chaos in the countryside. There was mutinies, namely the Potemkin. The majority of the army did stay loyal though. The St. Petersburg Soviet. They published demands for social reform, but its existence challenged autocracy. And finally there was armed uprising. Strikes became more violent, for example the Moscow Rising, which involved the Bolsheviks in an armed shootout against the police. The significance of this is basically the October Manifesto, the creation of things like the fundamental laws and the Duma, and that pretty much sums up 1905. If you want more information, please watch my other video.